Okay. Hello, my name is June. Welcome everyone. Thank you, Dr. Stein, Dr. Bernard, doctors from worldwide, and to the team of AMIQT program, along with George Washington University School of Medicine. Today, I'll be discussing psychedelics in medicine. So, what's the first thing that pops in your mind when you hear LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, or psychedelics? Psychotic hyena, or perhaps a clown drinking out of a poisonous bottle? It's actually very rational to think this way, ever since our media labeled and portrayed these substances as dangerous class 1 drug, meaning highly addictive and offer absolutely no medical value. This was probably the last type of illustration we would have thought when hearing psychedelics. What I want to emphasize throughout my presentation today is that these indigenous compounds, which I'll talk in more detail later, offer us an honest look at ourselves. And from this new perspective, humility, compassion, and community bonding naturally emerge. Additionally, recent scientific literature with psychedelic use in a clinical context have been remarkably successful and very contradicting to what our Western society historically vindicated it to be. So these ancestral plants have safe and ceremonial history that always included some kind of a community and ritual setting. And it goes back thousands of years with no evidence to cause physiological harm. So I wanted to quickly preface this presentation by challenging every scientist listening to have an open mind. As scientists, we constantly talk about what we don't know, right? We don't just babble on about 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 = 2. So we don't just babble on about stuff we know over and over again. We love talking about the unknown, the Big Bang, dark matter, or how to build a quantum computer, or in medicine, the pathophysiology of diseases. So when we talk about the nature of reality, there's plenty that we don't know. But part of what I want to argue for today is that there are some things that we do know. A feature of reality that is fascinating and worthy of our consideration is that there are many overlapping, seemingly different, but ultimately compatible ways of talking about reality. That extends not only to describing the world, but to understanding it at a deeper level. So what do our greatest minds of science have to say about the nature of reality? Roger Penrose, a Nobel laureate in physics, consistent with the theory of Pythagoreans and the Plato back in the day, looks at nature and the laws of nature and sees how precisely and extraordinarily mathematical they are. They postulate that maybe the underlying reality is not physical at all. It's not particles or forces. Maybe there's the underlying dimension of reality that is pure mathematics. And from that emerges this physical reality of world we experience. But there are also others that postulate, according to the hypothesis of Max Planck, the founder of quantum mechanics, and Einstein, we all know of. And they suggest that it's the mind, that the mind is the matrix of all matter, that we must assume that the conscious mind is the force behind governing all matter in space. I love this quote by Freeman Dyson here. As a physicist, I am much more impressed by our ignorance than our knowledge. So just for 10 seconds, I'm just gonna ask you guys to do something very simple. Just mentally be totally silent, don't move, don't behave, just be aware of what's coming into mind. I could say with tremendous confidence that what you just experienced was not a way of talking about the brain as you weren't talking. It's not a way of behaving as if we were not behaving. It's the underlying. It is that which comes before the talking and the conscious behaving. We've been overlooking something, pretending as if the mind-body problem is solved. It's not. We just talked our way out of it as if we know. The measurement of quantum mechanics has not been solved. It's been 90 years now, no progress. Mind-body problem, no progress. In 130 years, we've been overlooking something. And it's exactly the weakness here in modern science, that we've overlooked the nature of the observer. We're not taking the scientific, empirical approach to the nature of the observer. We've left out something, and that's us. We're more ignorant to the consciousness that we are of distant galaxies that formed 10 billion years ago, more ignorant than we are about the inner nucleus of an atom. So this is what the Eastern and Oriental view brings to the table. Not a dogma, not please believe this, please believe that. Methods of rigorous, refined first-person inquiry into the mind to complement the glory and the magnificent accomplishment of the objective science, which is the strength of the West. So why is this important? Well, we're now just beginning to incorporate our Western methodologies of empirical reasoning with the holistic methodologies of the East to study our mind, and we're seeing tremendous progress. So psychedelics, what does it even mean? Well, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to describe in words the complexities of this soul-revealing, mind-manifesting substances that everybody describes. So psyche, soul, delume, make visible, to reveal. One of the closest illustrations of these ineffable descriptions has actually been sort of captured by Disney artists and writers, closely resembling the mind-manifesting experiences that majority of people describe when using these psychedelic substances. There's this one scene in Fantasia. It's called Night on Bald Mountain. You can look it up on YouTube. It's based off of St. John's experience of the Witches' Sabbath on Bald Mountain in Kiev, near Kiev in the old Russian Empire, where the all-powerful demon called Chernobog invades the town with darkness and absolute terror. And the ancestral bodies, these ghosts leave the graveyard and sort of infuses with the demon. This is representing our ancestors, great-grandparents trying to fight off our own personal demons for us, which actually ends up exacerbating the chaos. Later, a bell ring appears. Ding, ding. This is representing the consciousness. And subsequently, the spirits trapped in the demon starts to release back into the town. And the most fascinating part of this illustration, aside from how amazing the orchestra and the music from Mussorgsky was, is that in the end, the demon transforms into this magnificent mountain that resembles some sort of a heavenly figure. And clinically, as Dr. Jordan Peterson, one of the greatest clinical psychologists of our century, notes, voluntary exposure to obstacles in your path that you regard as threatening or disgusting is almost inevitably curative, meaning that which you approach voluntarily shrinks as you approach it. Consequently, you grow from it, but if you run away, the magnitude of the discomfort worsens. And one of his favorite Disney movies that he frequently alludes to is the classic Pinocchio story. So Pinocchio goes down deep to the depths of the ocean and finds his grandfather, the ancestral spirits, inside the monstrous whale, where he's transformed into a genuine person representing the rebirth. His conscience, symbolized by Jiminy Cricket, is given a golden badge that reflects the stars, which is sort of an echo of the shamanic idea of the new soul. And these stories of transcendent experience in both life and death have always been embedded even within our own Western society. We see this concept everywhere, how life is paradoxically dependent on death itself, just like the famous apoptosis pathway. And so if death isn't regulated properly within us and the cells divide and multiply indefinitely, we get cancer. And so this concept is fascinating because it all holds true psychologically as well, because you have to let the old concepts die. And of course, they don't like to die. It's painful to experience the old you die in light of the new experience. So people resist it. And so looking at both the cellular models as well as the psychological models, death plays a restorative role. And it's somewhat a precursor to resurrection. Now, with the fundamental concepts of the psychedelic experience covered, I like to start my presentation with a dive into the psychedelic history, then its biochemistry along with mechanism, which I'm sure everyone in this audience is most excited about, and conclude with further implication with the psychedelic use. So how far can we trace back the human psychedelic evidence? There's preponderance amount of evidence that suggests that we've been using these indigenous substances by our ancestors of the prehistoric times. The temple complex shown in the bottom left corner there dates back to more than 4,000 years ago, and it was unearthed in 1976 by a Soviet archaeologist. Even in the Bible, we see evidence of the use of psychedelics. Taking a close look back into history, earliest Christians use psychedelics as a way of transcending everyday life and communing with the divine as means of strengthening their relationship with Christ, not just in Christianity, but Hinduism, Islam, and Buddhism all demonstrate strong archaeological evidence of psychedelic use as part of their religious sacrament. You could also see that even in the Scandinavian mythology with the world tree, which is associated with the heavenly realm, Asgard, the idea that you could travel and move outside towards the heavenly realm back and forth from the earthly realm. You guys probably recognize Thor, the movie. As more and more people started gaining access to psychedelics without proper guidance or instructions, it became very popular as a party drug, as a means of escape from reality. On the other end of the spectrum, military veterans found psychedelic use very helpful in treating their PTSD. Now, the Good Friday experiment. So psychedelics also captured the minds of scientists and researchers to investigate its therapeutic modalities. In 1962, Timothy Leary and Walter Pank, both based out of Harvard, conducted studies with psilocybin, a psychedelic drug. Teaming up with Harvard Divinity School, the site of the experiment was at Marsh Chapel, as you can see in the left corner there, on the campus of Boston University. The subjects, after receiving a dosage of either psilocybin or niacin, vitamin B3, attended a Good Friday service under the influence. The psilocybin subjects unanimously reported that mystical experience they had was entirely genuine, and many described the Good Friday experiment as one of the high points in their entire religious life. Even on a 25-year follow-up, they discovered that experience influenced them long into the future. One of the subjects in the experimental group who received the psilocybin, named Huston Smith, actually went on to write several textbooks on the topic of comparative religion. And the Good Friday experiment had long-reaching implications for the researchers. Timothy Leary lost his faculty position at Harvard, and anyone that even mentioned psychedelics in the scientific community was outcasted from the academia. So studying psychedelics became a political risk, if not a reputational risk, for you as a scientist. As you can see, Timothy Leary is getting arrested and put into jail. So, quick timeline here. In 1971, President Nixon declared a war on drugs, and he dramatically increased the size and presence of federal drug control agencies and pushed through measures such as mandatory sentencing and no-knock warrants. But in 1990, Rick Strassman, a clinical psychiatrist, applied for a federal grant to study the effects of DMT. And this was the very first study of psychedelics since the 1970s in the US. Then in 2001, Johns Hopkins University investigators Roland Griffiths and William Richards launched the first legal psilocybin research in almost 40 years and helped spur a wave of contemporary study of such psychedelic drugs. So the scientific evidence. Researchers from Imperial College of London used psilocybin, a major component in magic mushrooms, to treat a small number of patients with depression in whom conventional treatment had failed. The researchers found that the psychedelic compound may effectively reset the activity of key brain circuits known to play a crucial role in depression. The patients were followed up after 5 weeks and still had marked improvements, suggesting that even the single dose could have lasting effects. Subsequently, they went on to compare the most popular drug for depression, SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and psilocybin, psychedelic, in a phase 2 double-blinded randomized control trial involving patients with long-standing moderate to severe major depressive disorder who meet the criteria of DSM-5 over a period of 6 weeks. Researchers found a stark decrease in depression with psilocybin that was comparable in efficacy as the SSRI group to treat the depression. Professor Griffiths at Johns Hopkins also compared the effects of psilocybin with psychoactive substances, focusing on the abuse potential and its addictive properties. First study was looking at high dose of psilocybin, 5 grams, and comparing it to a high dose of methylphenidate under deeply blinded conditions. In the course of 2 or 3 sessions, they would get a dose of psilocybin, but they were also told that they could also get 13 other psychoactive compounds. Dr. Griffiths and his team recruited only people that had 0 prior experience with psychedelics, and thus eliminating the recruitment bias. So this was a very well done study. He found that the psilocybin group of people had some excessive sense of positive mood, transcendence of time and space, and ineffability, meaning they weren't able to put into words their miraculous experiences secondary to the psilocybin. When asked about the experience, the psychoactive drug group were only able to report their sense of euphoria limited to the duration of their drug experience, and their experience had no underlying significant meaning to their lives. But the psilocybin group were able to report their experience even after years as one of the most significant experience, even after years as one of the most significant spiritual experiences of their lives, comparable to when their first son was born or the experience with death of their mothers. So a very meaningful existential life experience. Professor Griffiths also conducted a study on patients fulfilling the criteria of DSM-5 for depression, specifically with newly diagnosed cancer patients. And he found that all their anxiety and depression dropped significantly. Even people that still didn't believe in afterlife, secondary to the psilocybin experience, there was a sense of the elegance and the beauty and the benevolence of the entire process that just made them feel filled with gratitude for the opportunity to be a sentient being and just have this experience in the first place, that there's something celebratory about it. He found that there's a sense of wonder that comes out of the mystery of what it is that we don't know. Now on to the fun stuff. So serotonin, a molecular neurotransmitter, monoamine neurotransmitter, consists of an indole, a bicyclic structure made up of a benzene ring and a nitrogen containing pyrrole, as well as an NH2 amine group. Oh, and of course the 5-hydroxytryptamine receptor and DMT. So dimethyltryptamine is a naturally occurring compound found in plants and animals as well as humans. And as you can see, the benzene ring and the amine group, just like serotonin. Now, DMT could be smoked, which leads to a different experience than when ingested in the form of ayahuasca, which is an entheogenic, meaning God encounter experience brew originating from the Amazon and is made from plants that contain DMT, usually Psychotria viridis, along with the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, Benisteropsis copiobine, that prevents the DMT to be broken down by monoamine oxidase and allows it to exert its effects orally. And we also have LSD, even though, as you can see, the biochemical structure is a bit more elaborate. Its base structure consists of the same indole as the other psychedelic substances. Psilocybin is it's special with the oxygen atoms attached to the C4 position with the phosphate group, and this plays the role of resisting the enzymatic degradation by the monoamine oxidase and makes it orally active without the need for MAO inhibitor like the DMT. So you guys are probably thinking, okay, June, that's enough with the chemistry. I totally get that. These images may trigger a little bit of trauma for us, for a lot of us, to our second year step 1 exam. But I just wanted to quickly point out how interesting it is that both DMT and psilocybin derive from the same precursor amino acid tryptophan. So when you ingest psilocybin, it gets absorbed in the liver. And in the liver, this enzyme, alkaline phosphatase, as we all know, is going to convert the psilocybin to psilocin. Being the phosphatase, it's going to remove that phosphate group off of the oxygen and make it look more like serotonin here. And as you can see, psilocin, the active compound, is a structural analog to serotonin, with the difference being that there's an addition of 2 methyl groups on the amine and a hydroxyl group attached at the 4th position, and as opposed to the 5th position in the indole ring. So psilocin, the active form of the substance, exerts its effects as a high affinity agonist at the 5-hydroxytryptamine 2A serotonin receptors, as well as a low affinity partial agonist for many different subtypes of 5-HT receptors. Psilocybin evidence seems to suggest that the psychedelic experience is salutary from the perspective of mental and physical health rather than destructive. So essentially, with the psychedelics, you're making your brain cells more sensitive to be able to process information quickly and effectively. There's an area in the brainstem called locus coeruleus, LC. It sends projections to the cortex that release norepinephrine. And LC has been referred to as the novelty detector. So normally, if you look at the firing in the locus coeruleus, it fires in bursts. So what happens is psychedelics increase those bursts and creates a sense of novelty as if they're experiencing something new for the very first time. The default mode network is basically the autopilot mode referred to as a DMN. It's basically like an integration center where information is collected and organized in ways that makes it coherent with regard to the rest of your cognition. The DMN is like a librarian who, when not handling immediate customer requests, indexes and categorizes books to keep the library neat and organized. Another way to think about the DMN is as a center of the self. It's engaged in self-reflection and metacognition. So basically thinking about thinking. It allows you to mentally travel back and forth in time, pondering autobiographical events or future problems. But as we all know, when it fires too much and is overactive, people become neurotic, depressed, or anxious. And so these psychedelics have shown to directly shut off these networks. Evidence also suggests that psychedelics can enhance learning and memory capabilities by increasing the amount of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, in the brain through the actions of 5-HT2A receptor, as I talked about previously. There are emerging evidence that suggests increased neurogenesis in the hippocampal region as well. So what? Why should we even care? Well, as more and more evidence, emerging evidence is suggesting, psychedelics may provide a solution to numerous problems that we had no idea to approach, whether it be Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or depression. Even considering our most popular therapeutic modality for depression, for traumatic mental health disorders, we made no progress since 1987 with the advent of SSRIs, which doesn't even work that well. Additionally, maybe Mother Nature isn't indeed trying to communicate with us by providing us these medicinal properties found in nature itself, and we've been rather destructive towards. And so we live in the most exciting era where we're beginning to combine the Western science with the Eastern, Oriental science that dates back thousands of years. As human society, we always encourage exploring some extraterrestrial sources for higher intelligence. But maybe, just maybe, we've been looking at the wrong places. And perhaps our higher intelligence exists within us, within our own terrestrial surrounding Mother Nature. As I end my presentation, I'd like to offer a quick special shout out to my mentor, hero, friend, role model, Dr. Tracy, a phenomenal pediatric orthosurgeon at Harvard, for providing me with the appropriate resources to put this presentation together. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you everyone for listening. Are there any questions?